everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman, and I'm so glad you're here for a great show. I'm so lucky to have with me a teacher, an actual teacher working in a school, and it is a Catholic school, but I'm pretty excited because we're going to learn a lot about how a school works when it actually works. James Furey, which is a pseudonym, but he's here to talk to us about his experience teaching in his school. I discovered him on X, kind of following along with teachers. You know, I like to see what they say. And what caught my eye was he would post about things he was doing in his classroom or how things were working. And I thought, wow, that's teaching, that's education, like what we all would hope it would be. And what I sort of vaguely remember, let's say from my private school experience, I went to public and private. And when I went to private school, it was like a whole new world of this is what school's supposed to be like. So I started seeing elements of that in his posts. And then I also saw some reactions, especially if I would comment, you know, what was happening in public schools, for example. And his reaction was sort of like a fish out of water, like, what? That's happening? Why is it, you know? So not that he didn't believe me, he did, but it was more like, really glad I don't have to deal with that. So these places do exist. And I thought I would bring somebody on to talk to us about it, how, you know, why it works and so on. And hopefully we'll all learn something about a functioning school and what it is like for a teacher in a classroom when they're actually teaching and not just, you know, emoting and teaching all the feeling stuff. So, but before we dive into that, I would like to ask you to please subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. So you can be notified when I make new content, like and share this broadcast so other people can benefit from the information we're about to share. And if you would consider supporting the channel, I would be ever so grateful. It really helps my work. You can support, of course, by liking and sharing and commenting. That all feeds the algorithm. But I do have some methods for direct donation, or you can join my Substack where I post articles and other videos. There are other ways that you can support the channel. Anything that amplifies, you know, the message out to more people is supporting it, but it also helps me by, you know, supporting the work financially. So thank you in advance for that. All right. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming my guest, James Furey. Hello, James.
Hi, how are you doing, Deb?
I'm doing great. So as I told everybody, I'm really excited to talk to a teacher who's having some success in the classroom. Tell us about your job, your school, and what it's like.
Sure. So I work at a private Catholic school in the Green Bay area of Wisconsin. This is my first year there. I actually started in public schools. I worked public schools for 7 years, took 2 years off to be at home with my kids, and then went back this year to a private school. And I could tell right out the interview that it was going to be a much better fit than the public schools. The reason I knew that is because in the interview, the principal did not sound crazy. They didn't sound like they were buying into all of the stuff that made me want to no longer be a teacher at the time that I had left. And then my experience being there has just been really eye-opening. You know, it's a school, it's not without its faults. You know, it's also not what a lot of people would think. We have about a third of our students are of Hispanic backgrounds, and you know, we serve everybody. We don't, you know, we're not super exclusive, except for if you break our rules, and then we do have the ability to kick you out, which is not done lightly at all, and it's not done often. But every once in a while, there is a case where that happens, and it needs to happen, and then the education of the other kids in school is saved in a lot of ways, because that's one big difference between our school and other schools is we center education and we don't allow people to disrupt that education. And if you do, there are consequences. And I believe that that's probably one of the biggest reasons that our school is so successful. We have 85% of our students go on to a 4-year college. Another 10% go on to a 2-year college. That's really high placement compared to a lot of the local public schools. And it's just been a real pleasure to finally be able to be in a room and get into my subject matter with kids who, if they don't care, they at least put on a better show of caring. And they, if not motivated, they're at least disciplined enough to pay attention and to do well.
That's great. So now, a couple of questions. You mentioned, the principal didn't sound crazy. What had you experienced that was crazy from other principals or other situations?
Maybe crazy is the wrong word for it. Maybe crazy making
Just
is what. Um, a lot of the times I talk to people in positions of authority in education, and I feel like they must know that what they're saying is not true. Um, and I know that what they're saying is not true or accurate, at least. And we're in this weird situation where we both have to speak this language and say things about teaching that none of us really thinks works, right? The public school model of, ultimate permissiveness towards all things it's not something that works. The idea that you can differentiate in a classroom kids that read at a second grade level and kids that read at a college level, and you're going to somehow hit them with the same skills and teach them to the same level. That doesn't work. It's not an accurate reflection of what a teacher can do, what a teacher can accomplish. And in interviews for public schools, it's always, how are you going to differentiate? How are you going to follow the IEP? How are you going to do this and that? What do you do if you have a problem student? It's really the answer to what do you do if you have a problem student is you tell them to get in line. If they don't listen, you kick them out, you write them up, and then the principal deals with it. But that's not the support that you get at public schools. This school, one of the things that the principal mentioned, she's a woman, and she said, we don't really have fights here. We don't have too many discipline issues. We did have a fight last year, but then we just kicked them out, and then there was no more fights. And I went, oh, that is so common sense and obvious, but it's not how things operate in schools that I've been to previously, in schools that my wife has worked at, also an English teacher, in schools that all of my friends have worked at, in schools that people all over Twitter, X, DM me about, saying that you're exactly right. This is how it is in the public schools. I guess I wanted to get that out there because a lot of times people want to accuse you of being a sample of one, but I'm in touch with a lot of people, and I do have, I think, a pretty decent picture of what public schools are like, both from personal experience and from secondhand experience.
Right. And I didn't mean to convey in the intro that when you were, hearing other stories, that it was like completely foreign to you. It was more just like,
Oh no.
wow, bummer that you guys had to put up with that. It's on a day-to-day basis foreign for you, not that you completely didn't believe it or whatever.
Well,
And
not even, even if it's not foreign to you, it is still astonishing to experience. You're like, oh my God, I can't
sure.
believe that this is happening. So it is like a shock. It's a continual shock when you see some of the things that happen, even if you
Right.
know and expect it to happen.
Yeah, and I would imagine too, as a teacher, that because I used to teach in a classroom, granted it was, back in the Pleistocene era, but
Yeah.
I would feel abused. I mean, I think if I were
Mm.
in today's classrooms with the lack of administrative support and even sometimes a lack of collegial support, I've heard that too,
Mhm.
where, teachers will gang up on the outlier who's kind of pushing back on some of the stuff. Without that support, without feeling like it's okay to be an authority in your classroom. I don't mean,
Mhm.
like authoritarian, like a dictator,
Right.
but authoritative.
Yeah.
If it's not okay to do that, if you're not actually the leader in the classroom, then you can't have discipline. I mean, that's the root word of, disciple, right? And that's
Mhm.
student, teacher. That's what
Right.
you're supposed to be. So if you can't do that, then you can't really get any teaching done. And I think that's a little bit abusive. You're setting the teachers up to fail. And if you set the teachers up to fail, you're setting the students up to fail. They're counting on you to
Right.
lead them towards knowledge. And so I would imagine to you observing it, you're probably it's like watching your friends get abused.
Hmm. Well, and, luckily I never worked at a school situation where this was the case, but sometimes that abuse is literal. I mean, there are cases of violence towards teachers happening that has been somewhat excused.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's every teacher's experience, because I do know that that's rare, but sometimes that abuse is literal. But what you're speaking about more broadly is definitely true. I mean, the entire heft of modern educational theory seems to be aimed at decentering the adult in the room. No longer are you the sage on the stage. I know it's cliche, but they want you to be the guide on the side, the facilitator. They want you to pretend like you don't have the knowledge, like it's co-constructed between you and the students, and that's really not how it works. Students cannot construct their own knowledge. They have to be led to it. They have to be
Right.
told it in some cases. They have to be, um, taught how to make use of it. And that decentering of adult authority is not just in the case of knowledge building; it's in the case of, you know, how do you keep control of your classroom? And when you're unable to do that, when you're not supported by that, and when you feel, especially as a conservative, like you're an island in a school of liberal-minded people who all seemingly disagree with you, it does feel very isolating, and it does feel like you're the alien, and that's not a good place for people to be, and it's not a good place to start to move forward. Even if reform happens, we're left with the teachers that we have. So what are you going to do?
That's a really good point. Speaking of that, because I've told people, the pipeline is the pipeline, right? What was your process to become a teacher? Or assuming you went to college and so forth. Did you major in English or did you do
Yeah.
education? Like, how did you? So you majored in English.
Yeah, well, I made it. It was a comprehensive English teaching is what my degree is. So I didn't have a minor. It was just all
Okay.
English and teaching methods. I was lucky enough that, well, I guess not lucky enough, but this is just how it happened. I took 10 years off between high school and going to college. I did not have a good high school experience. I was not a good student. It took a long time of the world kind of beating me up before I decided to do something with my life. So I went back to college, and I wasn't so young that I was just eating everything up. But I did go to a university in Eau Claire, which is a fairly liberal town, as most university towns are. And to some extent, I did buy into a lot of the theory and everything because there's no alternative, right? You're not being told anything else. You're pretty cloistered, and they tell you what they're going to tell you, and you have to kind of accept what they're saying because you don't know, But a lot of it did seem weird, And then I get into the classroom and I'm trying out all the things that they tell me, and I'm, trying to be a compassionate educator and do the restorative thing and do the constructivist, discovery method and all of that stuff, form of teaching. And it just fell on my face,
Oh my
and
goodness.
just my first year of teaching was so brutal that it's really what sparked a political change in me, is because all of my theories of human nature were tested and failed. They were just wrong. And that's what kind of set me on the road to becoming a liberal. But basically, my college experience was as bad of preparation as you could get to be in a classroom as you can think of. I mean, it
Yeah.
was not good preparation at all. And I think that a lot of people do that, and then a lot of people persist in it, because then you go to PD sessions and they tell you the same stuff, or you get some graduate uh, credits under your belt, which is what I'm doing right now, actually. And they tell you the same stuff, and you pick up a book from Heinemann or whatever, and it's the same stuff, and everything is just this mono message to you that's all failed policy, and you can choose to either persist or you can try to find other things. You can find John Taylor Gatto, or you can find E.D. Hirsch, or you can find Daniel Willingham, and all of this stuff, and try to replace everything that you had learned before. But that's a
Mhm.
tough road. But it's the road that I'm on right now, and I think that it's the road that a lot of teachers are starting to wake up to.
Right. One of the things I've noticed in talking to parents and people who are outside of education is they talk about teaching being effective as if that we're all working on the same project. So for
Hmm.
example, you and I might think that teaching is effective when the student, finishes a lesson and they have accrued more, they know more than they knew before they started,
Yeah.
whether it's actual knowledge that, they could repeat or use for something, vocabulary, math, whatever, or whether it's how to do so, how to acquire more knowledge, how to study, how to take notes, how to do things. And
Right.
so we think we're working on teaching the kids not just how to learn, but also actual substance facts.
Right.
And then there'll be other methods. And what I find are parents will say, well, why are they teaching it that way that doesn't work? Or why are they doing it this way? And I've found I have to explain to them they're working on a different project than you. So you're wondering why they teach reading that way, assuming that the end goal is the child be highly literate, have a large vocabulary, and be a good writer. Okay. Or
Yeah.
be able to think critically with the information that they've picked up from all this reading, when in fact, that's not what they're working on. They're working on the student becoming critically conscious of their role in society and their obligations to the collective and different things. And
Right.
this seems to me to be the hardest thing that I have to convey to people. Did, did Am I making sense? I mean, from a teacher's perspective, do you agree with my assessment on the inside? I'm looking at it from the outside. And that is my observation, or at least I should say my hypothesis, that what the reason they keep using project-based learning and student-directed learning and a bunch of things is that the goal is students who feel certain ways about the world rather than know certain things about the world.
Yeah. I don't know. I always have a hard time attributing intention. I think in
Well,
the
I don't
way.
mean conscious intention. So I don't
Oh,
want
okay.
anyone to think that I'm saying they're sitting there going, "Let's do this." It's
Okay.
more that their theory of mind, sort of the what is the role of the individual in the world and in
Yeah.
society, and why, what is the purpose of education? And if you believe, or you've been told often enough, that the purpose of education, it's a great equalizer, it's a social justice tool,
Hmm.
it's meant to deliver equity of outcomes, things like that,
Hmm.
then your entire theory of mind is going to be oriented a little bit more to each individual child thinking and feeling in different ways than they otherwise might, from,
Yeah.
because remember, they have this intrinsic stuff. Oh, you're white, you have intrinsic,
Right.
bias, whatever. Whereas if you see education not so much as a societal tool to arrange people in any which way, but as something to empower individuals to
Hmm.
advance their own lives and pursue their own goals and dreams and chart their own course and all that, with, on their own, just like
Yeah.
go forth and prosper kind of thing, then you have a different approach to teaching and learning. So like I said, when I talk
Yeah.
about critical consciousness, I'm talking about just the theory of mind. There's this idea that this
Sure.
is what we're supposed to do on the planet.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, I'm glad that you said that, because I think they're just all in on bad ideas. I,
Oh,
I, th- I
okay.
think that
Yeah.
they've just gone all the way in on bad ideas. Yeah, a book that I read is called The Transformation of the Schools by Lawrence Kremen. To me, that's one of the best explainers for what happened with the history of progressive education in America. And he goes all the way back to, Horace Mann, and then
Mhm.
on to John Dewey. And what we see is that the beginning of progressive schools were basically in reaction to the Industrial Revolution, where suddenly there's this whole class of kids that are being put into public schools because they want to train them for these more technological jobs that they have
Mhm.
available, or whatever, right? And then because of
Exactly.
that, then they start, kind of transforming the schools more and more. You take that and you combine it with the new, um, IQ tests, and they're trying to raise the IQ of everybody, and then they start having all sorts of classes that have nothing to do with the core subjects of education, and it just slowly over time it transforms, and then all of a sudden you have the beginning of Columbia University, right? The Teachers College at Columbia University, and then that becomes really the fountainhead of bad educational ideas, particularly William Hurt Kilpatrick, who is he's the progenitor of the idea of the project-based method.
Mhm.
He wrote a paper called the project-based method in like 1918 or something like that. And
Mhm.
that's just metastasized over time. And then that's all that education schools are now, is these ideas that were passed on from John Dewey and William Kilpatrick, and now through Furey and Giroux and all of these other people. And there's no outside of that. There's no, you know, I don't want to speak in absolutes, but there are no major competitors to the way that we certify teachers that is going to be outside of those theories.
Right.
And those theories are bunk. There's not a great evidence base for those theories. When we do look at the evidence base, a lot of the times the studies that they do are based out of these teacher colleges, which do not have very strenuous methods. They're not very rigorous in how they set up their studies and everything. And
Mhm.
then they're passing those ideas onto the smaller universities, and that's just all that we have now. And that's why when you pick up a pamphlet from the NCTE, they tell English teachers that maybe we shouldn't read books anymore. And if you're a little 18-year-old who's sitting in the university for the first time, and you've just went through 12 years of public schools, and you don't know any better, and they're telling you all this stuff, you're going to believe it. And those are our teachers. And now those aren't just our teachers, those are the teachers of our teachers, because there's been more than one generation of this happening. So the professors also are just devoted to these bad ideas. And now this is what we're left with. We're left with a profession that is devoted to bad ideas. And we've gone all in, and
Mhm.
it's not working, which is why we need competition, why we need privates, why we need other schools that are going to do things based on their own theory of mind. And hopefully the results will speak enough for themselves, and people will see through the excuse that it's too selective or whatever,
Mhm.
and know that it's the methods actually in the culture that matters more than anything else.
Yeah. I was thinking as you were talking, when you mentioned if you're, the kid and you're sitting in the classroom, the 18-year-old or whatever, and they give you these ideas, and you think, okay, well, they know it. Here's what I think is missing far before college, like even before high school, all the way back in what we might call elementary school, and even, the early years, early childhood, 0 to 7, when you form a lot of your, values and, ideas about yourself and the world and all that. And that is that somehow early in the process, I think in the progressive model, and Ayn Rand wrote about this in the Comfort Chicos. I don't know if you've read it, but it's a great essay
Mhm,
about progressive education.
mhm,
And that the the ability for the child's ability to conceptualize is destroyed. I mean, it's just cut off. They're presented with sort of this hodgepodge of things to do that is sort of like play in the early years. And whatever they're doing that's not sort of play oriented or discovery oriented, and it's disjointed, right? It's not like for purpose.
mhm,
They just tell them things, and the
mhm,
things they tell them again are one set of values and opinions, similar to like if you did go to a religious school or whatever, but there's not an opportunity to question. It's almost like a catechism, right? Which you
mhm,
might say, well, that's appropriate in a Catholic school, that you're going to go to CCD or something, you're going to learn this is a catechism. Okay, fine. But in an elementary school or in the kindergarten and so forth, um, you know, we have to think about, are they ready to hear fully formed concepts about abstracts like gender?
yeah,
Okay. Or
yeah,
something like that. Or even the gender roles that were in the 50s, like mommies do this and daddies do that. I mean, it's really no different. It's really no different. You're giving someone a fully
right,
formed idea of something. Whereas she compared it to, let's say, Montessori. Now, people often think of Montessori as it's open classroom and it's free for all, but it isn't. You have
mhm,
sort of sections that are devoted to very, very specific kinds of discovery. Like, let's say there's a water table and you have lots of different containers to discover volume and to discover, you're pouring the water and so forth. So there's a limited amount of things that you're going to be able to kind of construct there in terms of knowledge, and it's guided, it's set up by the adults for purpose. Like, we want you to
right,
discover the properties of liquids and volume here, and then over here
right,
you're going to do something else. So, and I remember having gone to Montessori school, that I had that when I went into public school for the first time in 4th grade, here's what I observed. And I remember this very, very well. I was annoying to my teacher. Not because I
Yeah.
was poorly behaved. I wasn't. I was well behaved. I was a good little kid, whatever. And I could read leaps and bounds ahead of the other kids. I spent a lot of time in Montessori reading books. I asked too many questions. Like, that's what I was told. It's like,
Hmm.
put your hand down. You asked too many questions. And so when I was reading Ayn Rand's essay about Comparticos, I said that I think is something that happens is play, fun, do the group thing. And now we're going to sit and listen and, we're going to tell you a bunch of things, play some more. But there really isn't any shape to it in the early years. And then it's like, okay, we're going to read. But even the reading these days that they're doing in elementary school is not, we're going to teach you phonics. Now we have a tool. And
Right.
so I think what happens is by the time that 18-year-old gets to college, school is, as much as you talk about it's not, sage on the stage or whatever, that's the first time they've had anything resembling a sage on the stage is college.
Right. Yeah.
So the whole way through, it's like this aimless, what do I do? Tell me where to go. Tell me what to do. They haven't had to figure anything out for their own. They don't really ask questions. They just kind of do and engage and engage and engage. And then they finally get to college and there's this authority. I'm the professor. You will read this and this is what it means. And they go, okay. Like they just don't. In my graduate school program at Penn, that's how it was. The teacher walked in one of the classes and said, teaching is a political act.
Yeah.
And they're all sitting there writing it down. And I'm like, oh, I have questions. Hello? So of course I was the only person in the class. Truthfully, one of my friends in the class, she's like, what are you doing? And I said, you just accept that? Like somebody comes into the class, this is the first thing out of his mouth, and you just write it down? She's like, well, he's the professor. I'm like, that doesn't make him right about everything.
Yeah.
You don't even want to know what he means. So of course I ask what he means. He explains it. He gets progressively more irritated with me as I challenge him. And I say, well, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And I just noticed looking around, I'm like, none of you are asking or not even challenging this guy. And so what I think is happening to a large degree, as you said, it's not this intentional evil, is that by the time the teacher pipeline gets down to where, now I'm in teacher college, it's a rare person. They exist, obviously. You exist, other people, but it's a more rare person than usual who challenges these bad ideas. So the idea is presented and it's like, oh, this is how it is. And that's why when you're talking to a teacher about, PBL or, any of these other methods, and you start bringing up things like direct instruction and they go, I think that's why they're not evil. They're not mean. They're not trying to deprive the child of learning. They just genuinely think their way is the right way.
Exactly. Well, and it's hard to see outside of that for a lot of people too. And especially, like I said, there's no real alternative. I don't know how I came across E.P. Hirsch. I just did somehow. And it was eye-opening. I went, oh, there's a whole different world of theory for how to teach in a classroom. And it ends up looking pretty traditional. Now they've done a lot of, studies and they've shorn up, a lot of weaknesses in traditional methods or whatever. But it basically looks traditional. Like you're teaching kids facts and you're making them be quiet while you talk, and you're sequencing these things in such a way that makes sense rather than just being random, and all of that. So I do think like it is, I really empathize. I really sympathize with teachers who are stuck in these situations and they're like, I don't really know how to get out of this, right? Because what's their alternative? They quit, or this is the job that many of them felt was their calling, and then they get there and they're like, this was my calling. This is my calling, to be like disrespected by kids every day and to be an utter failure in teaching them anything. And I do think that that's why they turn to these activities that are obviously just designed to be fun.
That's right.
They're obviously just designed to placate the kids, and that's why they say building relationships is the most important thing. Building relationships is the most important thing to a teacher that can't teach. That's it. Building relationships is important, but not friendships, right? I have a teacher-student relationship with all my kids. They get to see my humor when I want them to see my humor, but when I want them to sit down and work, they need to sit down and work. And that line is very clear, and they all know it, and they all get it, and they all crave that. Anybody knows anything about child and adolescent psychology knows that they would need structure, that the lack of structure makes them fearful. It gives them anxiety. That's part of the reason why I think, aside from the cell phones too, but that's part of the reason that I think that we have such an anxious generation, in Jonathan Haidt's words, right? It's because we have not provided structure for these kids, and they are their own authority, and
Yeah.
that's not how it works. It's not healthy for them.
No.
So, these teachers, again, they're not doing it on purpose. And I sympathize with their position. They're beholden to bad ideas, and I
Mhm.
understand why it's hard to get out of that. And sometimes it's just a matter of luck. Like I said, I don't know how I got out of it. I just got lucky, but
Right.
it's not a good situation.
No. Did you happen to see the video that was making the rounds about an English teacher who was using books, like, using novels, and the kids were all reading the same novel, and here it is, 2024, and she, assigned this, and one of the and I don't know if it was the principal or somebody said, "What are you doing? Like, why are you assigning this book?" And then she says, "What do you mean? I'm teaching English, I'm teaching these books." And
Yeah,
then they told her, "No, we have to prepare them for the test. We have to prepare them for the test." And then
yeah,
she said,
yeah,
like, "What? No, I need you to not be doing that because we have to get the scores up, whatever. And so you need to be working on this test." And so I think she said she tried it for like a day or something, and the kids were miserable. And she was miserable. She's like, "I'm not doing this anymore." So she went back to the books,
yeah,
and then she actually told the principal, she's like, she said, like, "We're reading the books, Janet," or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And she just did the thing. And then their test scores were the highest in the schools,
Of
in the
course.
school. Yeah.
Well,
Which, I
simply,
mean, you and I would predict to be like, duh, but this also indicates that administrators are also being
yes,
fed through that same kind of brain
yes,
meat grinder. If
yeah,
they're being incentivized to focus on other things and they don't connect, that the test scores actually will improve if the kids
right,
read books.
right. Well, I mean, look, the emphasis on tests really started with No Child Left Behind. That's when it got so out of control, right? It was what, 2004,
Yep.
maybe 2004, I think.
Yep. It was
So that was
horrible.
passed, and then the test became super important, and then we started focusing on test prep like crazy. And what's it
Right.
gotten us? It's gotten us lower and lower scores.
That's
Okay,
right.
now you look at someone like Jeremy Wayne Tate, who he does the Catholic
Yeah.
test, Catholic Learning Test, CLT.
What's
Um,
the classic learning test? Yeah, he's been
Classic
on
Learning
the
Test.
channel
There
a
you
couple
go.
times. Mhm.
And he has them reading specific books, right? And
Yep.
he just has them focusing on that throughout their entire, school. And those kids end up doing better in college. Those kids end up having better outcomes than the kids who are focusing on test prep. Because
Yep.
again, you have to have like a sequenced system of knowledge. Like you have to read Homer before you can read, James Joyce, right? You have to read the Bible before you can read almost anything, right? You have
Right.
to, we have this history of Western civilization that's built on all prior works. And when you take that away from them and you give them snippets of Moby Dick instead of having them experience an entire thing, of course they're not going to do well on those tests. They don't know anything. Then they're
No.
all of their mental capacity is focused on the stuff that is personal in their lives. They look at your, test prep thing for the 30 minutes that you have them in class, and then they forget about it.
That's
And you
right.
never bring it up again. So why shouldn't they forget about it?
Well, that's
The
a
curriculum.
very important point, that they end up with sort of no choice to focus on their own navels, right? Like on their own lives, their own problems. They get stuck in the eternal present because they're not really learning about the wider world, history, etc. And I don't mean in history class. I just mean
Right.
they're not learning about humanity in any kind of context.
Right.
And when you deprive children of that, they what else do they have to focus on? And their whole world becomes the right now. I think that's part of why we're seeing some of these crazed reactions to election results, is that
Mhm.
the everything is outsized to reality because their reality is so small.
Right.
They
Well, and
don't really have knowledge of a lot.
I think that works in conjunction. So it's that they don't have knowledge of the outside world, but then there is also that there's a very identity focused space, a school right
Yeah.
now. You know,
Yeah.
um, I worked at a school where all 4 years, the first project that they did every year was a narrative essay. They
I
did a
see it in my
narrative essay
tutoring. I see it in my
4 years
tutoring.
in a row. So it's just pick a time in your life, and at best, maybe we introduce plot terms to them or whatever. We tell them you have to do these things in the narrative, but it's just all focused on yourself. That's what student choice of reading is. That's just you find something that appeals to you, so that you never have to think about anything except for yourself. That's what the discipline not working out in schools. That's taking away the authority from the teachers. Well, we're putting it on the students. We're going to have restorative circles. They're going to talk to each other and apologize. That's how it's going to be. The kids are just in charge of every aspect of their lives, and they only have to think about themselves. And then on top of that, we're not providing them a vision outside of themselves. They're not walking in Odysseus' shoes. They're not walking in the shoes of Captain Ahab. They're not doing any of that. Right? They're always just reading about kids that are exactly like them, that are catered exactly to their skin color, to their gender, to their age, to whatever problem you have. We have a YA novel for every single person, and we hope that they find it so that they don't have to learn anything about anything other than themselves. That's one of the root causes of what's so bad right now. Is we've just I've phrased it this way on Twitter before: the child worship cult eventually turns into the child sacrifice cult, because you're giving them over to themselves and they don't know how to handle it.
No. And it feels like the adults are just abdicating their responsibility. And it's and what I don't understand, because a lot of people have said, well, that it's too hard. They don't, they don't want to do the job. I'm like, no, they make the job harder. The
Yes.
job of teaching is so much harder the way they do it. Like, I cannot even begin to fathom being in a school building all day right now in an average public school. To me, it would feel like being in an insane asylum with all the inmates just like roaming around.
Yeah.
And that's not to say every child behaves that way. I'm just saying there's
Oh,
no
yeah.
order, there's no peace, there's no calm, there's no real focus on material. And that would just go against my entire personality, my entire being. So who are the people who can function in that environment every day? Well, probably people who are comfortable in that level of chaos, which doesn't exactly give the students any role models.
Mhm.
People I've known who are, like you or like me, or, have a little bit more, structured idea of how things should go, tend to flee. I mean, they tend to be like, I'm out. I can't,
Yep.
this is not a place where I work. This is just a place where I come and keep them company, or like sit in the same room and hope I don't get beat up. And that's, like you said, it's not to say that every kid is violent. It's just that there's a level of noise and chaos that, and some principals will say, well, that shows they're engaged.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even going back to so it was 1991, I was teaching first and second grade in an elementary school in Winnetka, Illinois. And in one of my classrooms, I kind of went around, we had a team of teachers. And so you'd go like to different rooms and we would take on different tasks.
Sure.
And I was there for what they called sustained silent reading, SSR.
Yes. Yeah.
And during that time, and of course, ordinarily on every other day, I would be sitting there reading with the kid. I'd be reading also, right? Modeling the reading.
Yes.
Well, on that particular day, we were getting ready for a big show and tell of your hobbies or whatever. And I hadn't really done mine. I was kind of like, I'm going to use this time to catch up with I was knitting something. So I was like knitting a little panel to kind of show them that I like to knit. So the kids are reading, their heads are down, they're looking, and I'm sitting there knitting this little gauge panel. And the principal walks by and she sees me doing that. And afterwards, she pulled me into her office and she was just appalled with me. And she said, first of all, why were you not reading a book with the, and I was like, literally every other day I do that, like you just happened to walk by that day. And I explained what I was doing. Instead of seeing it in the context, she's like, no, you need to be engaged with the same thing that they're doing at all times. And then she said, and I've walked past your class many times in the last week and it's very quiet in there. And I'm like, yeah. And that's a problem. Why? And she says, they don't seem engaged. And you don't seem engaged with them. And I'm like, they're working on their writing and their handwriting and their letters and their stuff. They're first graders, it's like
Right.
they're doing things, they're learning, and they're calm and it's peaceful and everybody's happy. She was upset that my classroom was too quiet. And this happened. This went on for the rest of the year where I was getting this kind of feedback. By the end of the year, they did not renew me to stay there. They said I was not nurturing enough, that I didn't nurture the
Oh
children
yeah. Yeah.
enough.
Like,
And I was like,
yeah. Cause
I don't
we're the moms.
I don't even know what to say to that. But then when I asked, "Can you give me an example?" And she talked to me about one of my co-teachers, and she said, "Well, she gets down on her knees and she talks in the voice like this." And she said, "I've
Yeah.
seen you and I see you standing sometimes in the classroom." And mind you, I'm 5 foot nothing. Okay. So it's not like I'm 6 feet tall, towering over
Right.
the 6-year-olds. But I just
Right.
said, okay, so I'm standing and this is a problem, And she said, I mean, I could be sitting behind the desk, like filing my nails, but no, I'm like moving. I was walking around the room, going from desk to desk. She
Mhm.
said, you should kneel down more. And I'm like, well, I do sometimes. I mean, it kind of depends, right? What I'm doing. I said, but I will walk and I will stand and I will do things. But
Right.
no, I stood. And she said, and your tone of voice. I said, what's wrong with my tone of voice? At this time, I'm like 23 years old. Okay.
Right.
So what is your tone? What's my tone of voice? She said, well, you talk to them the way you're talking to me right now in the same tone of voice. I'm like, and that's a problem? What do you expect? And that's when she did the little soft, they can hear like Papa Bubble, put on our listening ears. That's when she did that stuff. And I went, but that's not me. And she said, well, what
Right.
do you mean? And this is, how you're supposed to have a certain presence in the classroom. I said, the one thing I've learned about children, small children, and I have a brother, but he's 18 years younger than I am.
Yeah.
So I have a little bit of a window into like what little kids, and I said, they can sniff out a phony from a mile away. Like
Right.
even the 6 and 7-year-olds, if they sense that you're putting on an accent or putting on airs or something, they're going to look at you like, what
Right.
they have a sixth sense for
Well,
that.
it's also a matter of, I mean, I've read this even about babies who are pre-speech, that you should not talk baby talk to them, because what you're doing is you're showing them that that's the way you're supposed to talk, and you're kind of actually holding them back from being able to speak better, right?
Yep.
I mean, everything I know about reading as well, you should be using vocabulary, um, you know, that you're used to using around babies, pre-reading, phonemic awareness and all that, because you're forming that vocabulary in their mind, right?
That's
That's the
right.
reason why it's so good to read to kids before they can read, is because the books are written with a vocabulary that you usually don't use in your spoken language. So anyway, this idea that kneeling down and talking like babies to them,
Yep.
A, it's not your personality, but B, it's not the right thing to do.
Well,
So
this is what I'm saying, is like so many things that I was being told, whether it was in grad school or in my early days, people like, why don't you teach anymore? I'm like, because I like to do things right.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
want to do wrong things. I would
yeah,
love to teach, but I don't want to do it wrong.
exactly.
I'm weird that way.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I've been lucky enough to, I don't know if lucky enough, but this is good for me. Not good for a lot of people, but teachers, a lot of times, maybe just a high school thing, um, have a lot of autonomy to do kind of whatever they want. So I, within public schools, have taught in my way. The only time that it ever is a problem is if somebody fails.
Yep,
So if somebody fails, then I have to start justifying things.
that's right.
But outside of
Elementary
that,
school,
I've been left
little,
alone.
yeah, elementary school, I think because they do a lot of team teaching, they do a lot more, especially these days, even starting back then. It's just, there's a lot more supervision of like what you're doing all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
And because of those all important third grade tests and all kinds of things.
right.
And yet the results are dismal. The results just get worse
Mhm,
and worse and worse. And then by the time the kids get to
mhm,
you, now you're in a private school now, but back in public school, and high school teachers would tell me, the kid gets to me, what do you expect me to do now? I'm like, so
mhm.
I got a kid who doesn't read. that was not my job. Like that was somebody farther down the food chain did not understand the
Right.
assignment. And now I'm supposed to differentiate for the kid, like you said, who reads at second grade level in my
Right.
ninth grade class.
Well, so that'd be, I mean, maybe a good time to talk a little bit about my school is,
Yeah.
so we're just a 9 through 12. We don't have middle and elementary schools. So we have something like 34 middle schools that feed into our high school. And those ninth grade teachers are hardcore for that reason that you just stated, is those kids get to them. And not only do they not know things, they don't know how to behave in a classroom or anything like that. So the first several weeks is just those teachers really drilling into those kids' head that this is our culture, this is how we operate. And then they have to take them from that and start to teach them things and start to shore up, all of these weaknesses that they're left with. And they are left with a diverse population of weaknesses. So we do tracking. Tracking is an evil word in education, but it's what works. So
I know
we,
they
we
taught us in grad school, like tracking is racist and bad. And
yes, yeah,
I think that was another one of those. I was like, but what are you gonna do instead?
right,
That's like, I
right.
was like, how are you going to replace the function that it served?
Right. Well, they have that magical word differentiation, which I've never met a teacher in real life that likes it, but online
Or
I've found
can
a lot
do
of them.
it.
Yeah, yeah, or can do it. Right. So yeah, so we have different levels of English class. So we have like a remedial English, we have the regular English, and then we have honors English, right? And you know, I'm sure that if a DEI consultant came in and saw those remedial level courses, they would be upset because that is where a lot of our minority student population ends up,
Right.
because the public school has not taught them anything. And the public school has not prepared them for a rigorous curriculum like we give them at my school.
Right.
So we take them from ninth grade, and by the time that they graduate, they are ready to go to college. They would not have done that if they had gone through the Green Bay area public schools. They just wouldn't have. Those kids end up with reading proficiencies in the single digits, right?
Mhm.
So you can call tracking bad. You can say, you know, being authoritative is bad or anything like that. But we're taking the exact population that these advocates of those policies purport to care about, and we're turning them out into better people, into people with better opportunities than they would have otherwise had. So I don't really want to hear too much about those failed policies, um,
So
because
it sounds like you're reality based.
yeah. I mean, it's a reality based school. I'm not Catholic, at all. I'm not a religious person
Mhm.
at all. But I'm in this school, with these people who have deep faith, and we do midday prayer every day, and we do morning prayers, and we do mass once a week, and we do all of this stuff. Well, that's culture building. That's amazing. I'm glad to be there for that. I'm glad to have a student population that is all in on that, or
Mhm.
if not all in. I mean, I'm not Pollyannish about this. And a lot of them, blow it off, and they don't take it seriously as we
Sure.
would like them to, or whatever. Excuse me. But you know, my rebellious 25-year-old atheist self would be like, yeah, go to that fantasy world Catholic school. And it's like, no, they are reality based. This school has a hold on reality, and they are implementing common sense practices that work, and the results are good. You know, the results are better than they are in a lot of other places. And again,
Right.
it's not because we just don't accept anybody. We actually have a charter, so we have to accept everybody. So people get money, and then they can come. But we turn those
Right.
kids around, and we kick like hardly any out. So it's not the selectivity. It's not that we're just kicking people out all the time as soon as we find out that they're not smart or whatever.
Right. Right.
It's they do believe in their mission, that they want to educate everybody in the Catholic way and give them a quality education. And where it's not perfect, they know it, and we're trying to figure things out. So
Mhm.
I guess
It
that's
sounds
my.
like it's the kind of place where if it's not perfect and something isn't working, it's more about, again, the effectiveness for the individuals in question. Even if there's a group of individuals, it's still, like, let's say the remedial class where, you want to figure out
Right.
how to improve their results. You're still ultimately thinking of them as people who will leave this school as individual people who have to go on, take this knowledge on the road and take these abilities on the road, and not that they are going to be part of some, activist group or mission or purpose. And that's the other thing I haven't heard you talk about. It doesn't sound to me, I've not heard social justice come up. I've not heard you talk about any kind of, social emotional learning beyond the prayer stuff, but like, and discipline, not like, mental health class or,
Right.
surveys about depression or whatever. I don't know. I mean, do you guys do stuff like that, or is the social emotional learning pretty much baked in the sense that, we have a set of rules, they're very clear, you will, adhere to them, we treat people this way, and now we're going to shut up about it and you just do it?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard the word social emotional learning the entire time that I've been there, but we do have like a wellness focus each month, which I'm not a huge fan of. But it's fairly innocuous compared to what I've seen in other schools. We're not surveying kids, and we're not trying to find their secret, mental illness so that we can somehow cater to them or
Right.
sell their information or whatever. We're not doing that sort of stuff. I do think that the spiritual aspect of things, that the faith based culture that we have, is, that takes care of a lot of that social
Right.
emotional needs. I mean, what's more
Right.
social than sitting in mass and singing a hymn together? I
Right.
mean, that's community. That's Those kids don't feel left out, right? Those kids know that they have a place where they belong in the world, right?
Right.
So, a lot of the focus on mental health and on SEL and on all of that other stuff, we just don't have it as
Hmm.
much. Now, that's not to say that there aren't individual teachers there who are very liberal. I mean, I tweeted about an email that was sent out today that was not making me very happy, and I
I
joked,
must have missed that one.
yeah, yeah, you have to look it up.
I'm like,
There's
where is
about the
that?
election, and I'm sure that person might end
Ah,
up in a little bit of hot water over it because all staff emailed about being sensitive to our Hispanic students after the election.
that's
Just,
not really appropriate.
yeah, it was crazy.
All staff email, yeah. And
Yeah,
and,
so
sorry, go ahead, finish what you were
no,
saying.
like I said, I think that's probably going to land them in hot water. I don't think that's something that's going to go unnoticed and uncared about, because that was so out of pocket compared to everything that I've noticed before. So anyway, we do have these, like, we have liberal teachers that work there, but even the liberal ones, like, I found out that my work best friend is a progressive style educator. I'm like, oh man, we're like enemies.
That's
but
so funny.
but when we talk about discipline and about culture and everything else at school, she's on board with all of it. She just wants to teach this other way, you know. So there are these pockets of liberalism even in this private Catholic school that exists in a red county.
Right, right.
But overall, the school just is not catering to that.
Yeah. And you know what I find interesting is that in the same classrooms and schools primarily, because where they do this SEL stuff, it's usually whole school. But in those schools where they have the least amount of traditional discipline and least amount of structure, because the argument is the students need to, discover on their own and the learning and all that. And you and I are sitting there going, huh? Meanwhile, when it comes to social emotional learning, there's no thought that humans should discover and experiment with, whether it's at recess play, hanging out with each other at lunch, having a conversation, just making friends in the hallway, like, when we were kids, maybe. That we learned a lot about social interaction and
Oh yeah.
socializing and things from just having the adults not involved. In other words,
Yeah.
we had a lot of space and time to just be the kids around the kids, talking to the
Mhm.
kids. Was it perfect? No. I mean, kids are bullied, they make fun of whatever. But I feel like we had a, a easier time learning how to deal with it or finding our people, so to speak, like finding, okay, you guys are the mean people. I'm going to go over here with the nice people, whatever.
Right.
Whereas
Yeah.
when they do SEL, I feel like they're taking all the traditional methods plus some that are not traditional, like these surveys, and micromanaging the emotional lives of the children and the emotional learning of the children, but not the
Mhm.
cognitive, and
Mhm.
intellectual learning of the children. It's almost backwards, where they should
Yeah.
be left alone to become who they're going to become as people in that social emotional sense, so that adults are not, because we think about it, if a parent behaved that way, we would recognize it instantly as abusive. This is what
Yeah.
you should feel. These are who the people you should be friends with. We'd look at him and be like, back off, mom, or
Right.
dad. Like, why are you micromanaging your kids' relationships? But when it's a teacher or a school doing it, it's like, oh, well, they're making them into better people. And yet, if we say, the English teacher is telling them, about the real, parts of speech and things like that,
Right. Right.
and grammar, whatever. Oh no, you shouldn't do that. Let them experience, or math. They need
Right.
to experience math. What? And this
Yeah.
is why I feel like I'm 100 years old listening to these people talk, because
Yeah.
in the world of me, it should be the other way.
Right. Right. I mean, well, as I mentioned before, with the thoughts of Dewey and Kilpatrick, those go back 100 years. So you don't have to feel old because their ideas are old too.
Okay. Okay. So I mean,
Relatively, we're
but
doing
but
fine.
still they did it kind of, I don't know, they still were doing it right, or more people were doing it right. I think what really, and tell me what you think about this. I think what really did us in, although the progressive model was always like destined to not be so great, because the compulsory education laws, I think, are just immoral, and I think it's
Yeah.
unconstitutional
Hmm.
to assume that parents aren't going to educate their kids instead of giving them a chance. And then if they don't, like, if we assume you're going to feed your kid, and if you don't, neglect your kid, well, we have a process for that, right?
Right.
But I'd like to think it could be the same for education. If you lock your kid away, or you put them on a job at 3 years old or whatever, and they don't get to learn, well, then maybe we should step in. But without any due process, it's like you're all assumed to be guilty from the start. You're going to go send your kids to school, or you're going to have to answer for it. And I think we were going to always end up with the state deciding what was going to be after that. But tell me what you think of this, that if we didn't have the Department of Education, and the states were still running it like a state level like experiment, right? Like, they have their own state education department, and so forth, that other states can look at and like, who's doing it well, who's not doing it well.
Yeah.
I feel like it skewed the incentives. You mentioned the No Child Left Behind and the
Hmm.
focus on tests. Well, that was because money. They
Yeah.
essentially said, if your kids don't pass these tests at this level, you will not get the federal funds. Well,
Yep.
suddenly the incentives are not around the children learning so much as the children performing in a
Hmm.
certain way in a certain test. So now the incentive becomes, okay, if they don't do well, we need to press some politician to change the test, or
Right.
press some politician to give us more money or more time or more something else. But nowhere in there is, let's teach better,
Right.
because they're going to take the money away. So I just feel like, with the advent of this giant pot of money to be used to like get schools around the country to behave in certain ways and like run through the rat maze a certain way, that it was always progressive, but that skewed it farther.
Oh, for
Or
sure.
what
Yeah, I mean, it's the
way from
definition of
that?
a perverse incentive. Not only does it incentivize us to teach to the test, but it teaches us to lie. I mean, it incentivizes us to lie. I mean, there's been cases of teachers just giving answers on those tests and, to boost their scores because they're looking at, the schools losing money.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I've always said the schools don't have a funding problem; they have an allocation problem. They have a problem
Yes,
of
for
allocating the
sure.
funds. There's a lot of money in education; it's just going to stupid things. We could cut the budget just a ton and just buy, teach your child to read in 100 easy lessons. It's a structured phonics program that you can buy on Amazon for $35. That's how I taught my son to read this summer.
It works
Right.
perfectly.
Right. And you just read a script and the kids learn how to read. And
Yep.
that's it. So what are we doing instead? We're doing crazy expensive things to teach them how to read. And that's just one thing. Green Bay area public schools bought textbooks for every single ninth and 10th grade student in their entire school. That's something
Yeah.
like 10,000 students, and those books are not cheap. And then those books end up collecting dust on the shelf. It's just another, waste. And then not to mention how much wasted money we put into the salaries of administrative positions that don't do anything at all. At best, they do nothing. At worst, they meddle in ways that mess kids up. You know, um, yeah. So again, the funding problem isn't really there. It's a funding allocation problem, and the how we give money to schools based on tests is an example of that. Like, why are we giving money to schools that are teaching to the test?
Right.
Why are we giving money to schools that have high graduation rates when that's the most gameable metric that you could possibly imagine?
That's right.
Like, why are we sending money to different schools for doing things that have no positive effect on the student whatsoever? It's just really backwards.
And I would bet that your school is probably spending less per pupil than the public schools, because the charters typically do, and so do private schools, and yet turning out better results. So the proof is kind of in the pudding, that it's getting done for less. And, I just wish that we could really audit this process. So, we could audit all these schools, then people would see. They would see how much money is just frittered away and wasted. And then we also are doing things now that we didn't used to do. And I know that there are some charters now, well, not charters, sorry, there's some private schools that don't provide any of these services, and they're able to get it done as well. And that is, they don't provide meals. They don't have, a cafeteria, kids bring their lunch. They don't provide transportation. They don't provide
Right.
sports and healthcare and all these things in the school. So it's just, you come to school, we have teachers, and you learn. There's a school nurse in case there's like an emergency or whatever, but otherwise you're bringing a sack lunch and there you go. Like, they just don't provide all these extra services, and they're able, I think it's Thales Academies here in North Carolina. And I think they might be opening some other places, but the guy who started them wanted to do charters, and then kept, butting heads with people about what the kind of regulations in North Carolina they wanted around the charters. Every state's different in that respect. And he finally said, I'm trying to work within the system and just do something better, and it's not working. So I'm going to go with a low tuition private model, and we'll just strip it down to the bare bones. And that's what's been working. And they have great results. They even train their own teachers. They don't get the teachers out of the typical method.
Yeah.
And you don't need to spend so
I think
much money.
And that sort of model would be able to work and expand and, make franchise or whatever, if it wasn't competing against schools that are given money for doing nothing, for doing nothing for the kids, for not improving, their education, their reading scores or anything like that. So it is, people like that, I commend him, and that's great that he's made that decision. It shouldn't have to be that hard for him, right? If he has a model that works, it should be allowed to work in more than just his little niche of North Carolina. But how do you do that when, again, there's just this monolith that's opposing it, and that has much more money, and that money is tied to excuse me, I got a little cold today. The money isn't tied to how well the schools perform or anything like that. It's just tied to, the government giving it to them. So that's it.
Exactly. And even if the money is given based on some arbitrary measure of performance, like these tests, even that isn't really, that's not market forces. So, I talked before we jumped on the show that, a true market-based solution would not only allow for all this competition. Now, the government wouldn't have the monopoly on almost all the money. And it's close to $1 trillion. But you would also, parents would see failure, they would see success. They'd push back, there'd be different things. And this is where you get quality, is when there's competition. real
Right.
competition. It's not like I'm putting my finger on the scale for this one. And, you know,
Right. Right.
which is basically what we have. We have a monopoly, and then we have fingers on the scale,
Mhm.
because they'll still do like, well, you can be a public charter. We'll approve your charter, but not yours.
Right.
And we'll give you, more money than they're getting because reasons,
Right.
and then they set standards and all that kind of stuff. So, but it's so complicated to explain to people sort of outside the system. I don't know why people assume that schools work the way they assume they work. But this is
Mhm.
what I come up against quite a bit. When people say, well, why can't they just do XYZ? And I'm like, well, it doesn't work like that. Or, for example, people will go to school board meetings and they yell and scream at the school board. And
Mhm.
I'm not saying all these school board members are great people. Like, some of them
Right.
are not at all.
Right.
But they actually don't have the power that people think they do to do the things they want them to do. It's like, go tell this teacher to don't not teach this thing in the
Right.
classroom. School board is like, I'm not their boss, like, at all.
Right.
I don't have that
Right.
authority. So, I feel bad because parents don't seem to really know, like, who do I go to and where, how does this all work and who's in charge of what? And that's the other benefit of a more private or market driven solution is you're the customer
Mhm.
and you go to the person in charge of whether it's the building or the institution or whatever it is, if it has multiple buildings, and then you have that conversation. But you're not 17 layers of administration, and they
Right.
don't really talk to each other the way you think they do. And that's
Right.
what's causing a lot of problems. It's very opaque as far as
Yeah.
how it actually works.
Yeah. I mean, in a market-based system, you get to vote with your pocketbook, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you put the
exactly.
money to what you think is going to work, and then if it doesn't, you just extract your money, right?
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
just a little sidetrack. Not going to get too lost here, but on those 2 years where I wasn't teaching, I was managing a bar, right? And this person just bought his parents' building and decided to turn it into a bar. And there's nobody helping him or anything like that. He just had ideas and he started cooking, and this thing turned into this crazy success in 2 years. You can't do that with a school, right? You can't just have the entrepreneurial spirit and decide, I have an idea that I think is going to help people, that I'm going to implement it and I'm going to do all my own practices and all of this stuff. I'm going to make sure that it's not, like a torture chamber or anything crazy. There are some, regulations that would have to be in place or whatever. But overall, you get to work out your own educational model, and the parents get to pay for it or not.
That's right.
I don't want someone telling me what bar I can spend my money at. Right? I don't want someone telling me what restaurant I can eat at. Oh, you can only eat at this restaurant. It's 2 blocks away from you, so that's the best positioned restaurant for you. So there you go. Right?
Good
That's okay.
analogy. Or
That's what we
grocery
do.
store or any of it.
Right, or anything. That's
Yeah.
that's an absurd proposition, but that's exactly how we were working with schools. It would be much better if there's more people like the gentleman that you mentioned in North Carolina,
Yeah.
who just be charged with that entrepreneurial spirit, work on it with their own funds, and either
Sure.
succeed or fail on their merits, and their merits are determined by what the parent wants. That would be beautiful.
Right.
I just feel like it's so intractable right now
It
to get there.
well, first we've got to start dismantling things and, kind of
Mhm.
start rolling things back, and then
Right.
maybe we can get there. But I want to talk a little bit more about teaching methodology, because we've sort of just
Sure.
danced around a little bit, talked about it,
Yeah,
direct,
yeah.
but in particular in English, this is a subject very near and dear to my heart. I wasn't an English major, I was an American studies major, but half of that is English.
Sure.
And when I decided to teach, that was one of the things I was looking forward to most, was teaching kids to read. And then, even though
Yeah.
I didn't teach in high school, I wanted my students to be good readers so that they could go and have the benefit and the wonderful experience of learning, great books and so on.
Right.
And one of the things that has pained me so much, I mean, really upset me, is that the schools are not doing novel studies. They're not assigning class is all, we're all reading To Kill a Mockingbird, or we're all reading whatever it is. And parents
Right.
still think they're doing it, but they're not. At your school,
Mhm.
they are, I'm sure, but at most public schools, they're not. And parents are always shocked to discover that. they'll say, but such and such is on the reading list. I'm like, as a choice, as a choice, you understand? It's not assigned where the teacher's not reading through it with them and all that.
Right.
And because I genuinely feel that there's so many life lessons that you get from reading great literature that they're not learning. And because I tutor, and most of the tutoring I do is writing. So I
Yes.
get a lot of seniors in high school coming, they're writing their applications. And a lot of these kids have fantastic grades.
Hmm.
So what I'm finding is I'm not getting students who are remedial. Some of these
Yeah.
kids have very high grade point averages. They've got even decent SAT and ACT scores. But when it comes to sitting down and writing those essays, they are lost.
Yes.
And I'm sitting there like, I mean, okay, great, I have work. Okay. But
Hmm.
it's so frustrating to me because they're going off to college and many of them are applying to Ivy League schools. And I read that article, maybe you saw it as well, where the professor said, kids are coming in, they can't read
Oh yeah. Yeah.
into these, elite schools. And then I did a
Seem like
piece on
they've
my
never read a
Substack.
single book in their life.
That's right.
Hmm.
And what I'm hoping you can do for us is explain as an English teacher sort of how you approach it with your students, but also explain to parents what they're missing out on, what their kids are missing out on.
Sure. So I think just to make it easier, I'll try to narrow it down just to grammar. Just to one instance, I think will be illustrative of a larger thing, right? So I believe in the research I can point to would back this up, that you need to start really simple and really small very early. So language instruction starts with grammar very early, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to be explicit at first, right? A lot of grammar can be picked up through just speech and reading, right? Because you're introducing them to complex sentence structure, and you're introducing them to, pauses in your speech, and later you find out that that's where the commas go or the semicolons go or whatever. But you start very small, and that needs to be built progressively, and it needs to be brought to mastery before you move on to the next concept, right? There is so much in language arts that you cannot catch them up in a year, really. I mean, it's maybe someone can, maybe one-on-one intensive, tutoring. Maybe that's the style of thing that you do, and you get them caught up pretty well. But it's so much easier to just give them a little bit at a time and to bring
Sure.
them to mastery of that concept before moving on to the next one, and then moving on to the next one. So even though I have almost nothing but good things to say about my school, I don't think the other teachers teach much grammar. So they come to me not knowing much of it. So I start with subjects and verbs. That's like the first two things that I talk about.
What every sentence needs.
Yeah, every
Ex-
sentence needs, yeah.
Except no.
The first unit is elements of a sentence is what it's
Right.
called. So then we're
Right.
talking subject and verbs. Subjects is who or what the sentence is about. A verb is either the action that they're performing or something that links them to a description, the subject to a description, right? And then like we spend 2 weeks on that, and we just talk about that, and we practice identifying. We talk about the different kinds of subjects. We talk about the different kinds of verbs, and we're just progressively mixing more and more in, right? That's kind of my style. I'm mixing more and more in, but I'm doing retrieval practice too. So we'll abandon that concept for a week, and then the next week I'll do a little retrieval quiz to see if they still remember it, because the science shows that if you recall information from memory after a spaced amount of time, then that strengthens the memory. It strengthens the neural connections. So I bring them to mastery, I let off, I come back to it, and I'm just doing that. It's just recursive over and over and over again. So I'm building from subjects and verbs to phrases and clauses to compound sentences and complex sentences to compound complex sentences. And then we're doing apositive phrases, and we're just building over the course of the year. And at some point, that grammar work, which is very concrete and very, one concept at a time, it's almost mathematical, right? Like
Yes.
grammar is
Mhm.
like the math of English in a way. Well, eventually that just turns a corner to now it's a composition study, right? Because we're talking about, sentence variety. Well, sentence
Mhm.
variety is one of the keys to good writing. If you look at professional
Mhm.
writers, they use more complex syntactical structures than, people that are not good at writing. So I've brought them from this very simple subject and verb thing and shown them how that's the seed to making a clause and how a phrase works differently. And then now I'm telling them how to include, these 6 different types of phrases into their writing, these 4 different types of clauses into their writing. And all along at the same time, I'm building their vocabulary, and I'm building their knowledge of literature. And
Mhm.
then eventually that all just turns into each other. Right. So
Right.
that now, not now, but later, I'll be able to say, all right, you have to write a paragraph that has sentence variety, that uses these kinds of phrases, that responds to this piece of literature and uses this vocabulary. But I've done
Yeah.
every single strand of that very slowly, very progressively, just adding more and more in as you go.
Right.
Now, if I had my druthers, that would start in 3rd grade,
3rd
right?
grade, that's when it's supposed to start. Yep.
Right. That would start then when you start to get much more explicit with your instruction and with your knowledge building. So I'm sure
Sure.
you're aware of the reading scores. They actually show that um, kids of low socioeconomic status and high socioeconomic status are pretty much neck and neck
That's
until
right.
around 3rd, 4th grade. Well, what happens is, according to E.D. Hirsch at least, is the kids who have been reading and who have been read to, they have a knowledge base that they are building on. Whereas the other kids who have not grown up being read to and who are not growing up reading, their knowledge base drops off. So when you start to test them, you're not actually testing their ability to decode, which is true. There is a gap there as well. But the true thing that you're testing is cultural knowledge. And some kids have it and other kids don't. And those are the kids that drop off. And that compounds over years until they get to high school, knowing nothing. And then we go, well, I don't know how to teach them. I can't teach them how to read. I'm
That's
not a
right.
certified reading instructor. What am I supposed to do? I have a 11th grader in my AP class. I'm getting a little specific now. I have an 11th grader in my AP class at a previous school. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that he's illiterate. How did he get to this point? And what am I supposed
In
to
an
do about
AP class, no less.
it? In an AP class? So it's
Yep.
like, well, what do? You fail him? You know, that's, maybe on some level fair, but on another level, it's like, but he's been failed his whole life. He's
It's
been
been
failed by
set up to
all of these
fail.
teachers
Yeah.
leading up to now.
Mhm.
So what do? You're in this position. And again, I sympathize with teachers so much
Right.
because you get in this position where it's like, I have to do something. I can't just let this kid down and ruin his life. He's been lied to for 11 years. I'm going to shatter the illusion.
Yep.
So anyway,
And
sorry,
it
I
happens.
got off field about the question.
No, but it happens to kids even, in from upper middle class families, whatever. My younger sister, did not have the Montessori background that I did. She went straight into public school. When we were, let's see, so I was going into 10th grade, she was going into 6th grade, and we moved from, sort of the town to the city. And I didn't want to go to school in a building. Like, I didn't want to go to school in the inner city school. I was an athlete. I want to be outside, whatever. That's when I elected to go to boarding school.
Sure.
But my sister went into one of the sort of private schools in New York City, and she was trying to. She was taking the test to get in, and they came to my dad after she got such a low score on the private school entrance exam, and they said, "We don't know exactly how to tell you this, but your daughter cannot read. Like, she's
Yeah.
illiterate."
Oof.
Now, all those years, and he was a single parent, so, all those years that she was in public school, they just passed her through. They passed her through. They didn't tell him there was a problem. They just kept
Mhm.
advancing her through the grades, and there she is going into 6th grade, and she cannot read. And
Yeah.
so by that point, she had to go to like an all summer intensive program to make up for it. And she was able to learn to read enough to, no dyslexia or anything. She was able to learn to read enough to get through middle and high school, go to college, and so on, but was never a reader, meaning like hates to read books, sort of
Right.
brags about
Yeah.
it. Like, I don't like to read, all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, for me,
Yeah.
reading was like life, you know? We were just so
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
Same household. And I bring this up because I want to show that as much as we talk about, kids who are read to it, she was read to, maybe less than I was, perhaps a little, because
Right.
of the divorce and so on. But this is just to show you that even when you have, a household full of books, a parent who's Ivy educated, advanced degree, etc., and even an older sibling who's demonstrating and modeling reading constantly, like I was always my nose in a book and everything, that if
Right.
your school does not teach you to read or just socially advances you because you've hit the age and it's time to go, you can even be from that kind of background and end up at the ripe old age of 12 or 13 and you don't know how to read. So it's
Right.
not just kids who are impoverished or just kids who are minority. It can be kids who slip through the cracks
Yes. Yeah.
because of the process. And I really wanted to bring that up because I think it's really easy for people to let themselves off the hook as parents, let's say, or even as teachers, assuming things about their own children that just don't happen to be true. I've come across this in tutoring, and maybe you've seen this before too, where you have to go tell a parent that their child is very far behind,
Hmm.
and they look at you like, "What are you talking about?
Yeah.
I've never heard this before. No
Yeah.
teacher ever told me this before." And you don't want to be mean, but you're like, "So you've never asked your child to read anything for
Right.
me or
Yeah.
anything?" They don't know.
Yeah. I mean, so you know, I do. I very much think that parental rights is super important. I very much think that parents have a lot of grievances, legitimate ones against schools right now. But I also think that for a section of the population of parents, that some of them have just gone, public schools got it.
That's
So they
right.
advocate their own responsibility.
Set it and forget it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, it's hard, and I want to be sensitive to parents and everything. But you do have to like stay on top of your kid's education. I
Yeah.
taught my son to read this summer. Right, he's 4 years old. I'm like, I'm not leaving that in the hands of the schools. I've
Smart.
seen what the schools do. Like I've listened to all of Sold the Story. you know,
That's
like
right.
I know enough about reading instruction to know what works and what doesn't, and to know that the public
Mhm.
schools, are starting to be held to some account in some states. But I know
Sure.
that by and large, it was Lucy Calkins and F&P, and that was all you got, and there
Yeah.
you go. So parents cannot abdicate their responsibility in the realm of education. You
No.
cannot assume that the school is doing right. I think that not most, but I think that a large number of parents are waking up to that. But I think that
Yes.
there's probably a generation of kids who have really been
Sure.
screwed over from
Well,
that.
I think too, it's a double-edged sword because when parents do try to get involved and, check in on things or ask a lot of questions, they're increasingly, and by increasingly I mean in the last decade, really, they've bumped into like roadblocks, gatekeeping,
Mhm.
stonewalling and things.
Mhm.
It used to be that even with my eldest, who's now 21, she was, I have 3 children, and my eldest was the last one who, when she did go to public school, I homeschooled for a time and then divorced, she had public school. And she was the last one who brought back a backpack full of books and assignments
Right.
of any kind. And that was, I think that ended in roughly 5th grade.
Yeah.
And then it was Chromebooks, and I couldn't find anything. I was like, what are you doing? Where are your books? Where are your assignments? I want to look at things. I want to touch them. I
Right.
want to see a
Right.
syllabus. I would go to the teacher night and like, do you have a syllabus? What? What are the books you're going to be using? Well, we'll get to that. Well, it's going to be on the Chromebook. I'm like, no, 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 no. I want to see the book. And that was my first clue, like going into middle school, that something has changed. Something has fundamentally changed from school that I can see and touch and interact with and turn pages with and look at the notes and look at the assignments. If I want to be an involved parent too, even if I want to be an involved parent, I I won't say can't. Can't is too strong a word, but I'm going to be
Right.
jumping through hoops and asking so many questions that I become a nuisance. And in many cases, what I found was I didn't get the answers. I would have had to FOIA my
Yeah.
child's curriculum. And it's like, I shouldn't have to put in a freedom of information request to ask
Right.
what my kid is learning. And I think that was part of the reason a lot of parents, especially busy ones, like, what's in the Chromebook? I can't find it. I must be stupid. I must be, or the teachers, some of the feedback I got, and I would have to tell them, like, I'm a former teacher. You kind of can't blow sunshine up my
Yeah.
butt.
Yeah.
So they, but they didn't like me very much because of that. But there were other parents who aren't going to know that. So if a teacher says, we got this, don't worry, it's fine, and everything's good, she's doing great, and they give you enough, she's doing great, it's fine. No, don't worry, everything's good. You don't need to, we'll come to you if you need to know something. That plenty of parents felt like, okay. And then there's also the we're the experts and you're not people, they exist.
Yeah.
And there are lots of parents who are easily influenced by that. It's sort of white lab coat syndrome for teachers. Where's your teaching degree from? And you're like, okay, never mind. I'm sure you got this, right? They feel intimidated. They don't want to, and they also don't want their kid to feel repercussions or backlash. So they don't want to get into a fight with the teacher or the school. There's just been a lot of gatekeeping. So I have a little bit of compassion for the parents who sort of woke up during COVID, virtual learning, and were like, what? Because probably more than half of them, if I had to guess, would like to have been more involved, but weren't really permitted. Like it just was not able to be gotten to because of the technology. And so I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, I saw that coming from a mile away. Actually, when COVID, I had run a blog for like a month.
Had you really?
And that was one of the things that I had written about, was like parents are going to start to see some things that they're not going to be very happy about. And I didn't realize the extent to how true that was going to be. But I knew that there was, as you mentioned, some educational gatekeeping going on there. And I mean, again, I do think that people are starting to wake up to that more and more. And hopefully that continues. And, hopefully 4 years of, administration that seems hostile to the DOE will do some good.
We'll see. We'll see. But that brings me to sort of like the last segment that I wanted to get into with you, which is, there are things that you've mentioned that your school does well, like discipline, structure. Teachers are allowed to sort of teach and actually instruct, and not that they all do. I understand that you have your way and other people have theirs, but that you have a fair amount of autonomy to do it the right way and so on, and that results matter, objective results matter, and so forth. But what parents ask me is, how do I find out, like, what should I be looking for in a school? If I'm looking for a school to move my child to, a private school or a charter school, whatever, how can I really tell from the outside that it is better in the way that you and I have been discussing? And that doesn't mean it will be better for every child. So I don't want anyone to think that I agree that there's a one size fits all. I don't think there's a one size fits all. But if we're talking about what James and I talked about a little bit ago, which was that there's this project that you work on for your individual child where they're going to be, better today than they were yesterday in terms of their knowledge and their skill and their confidence and all the thing, and the confidence comes from competence too, I believe. You probably agree. And so on, that if that's the project you want to work on for your child, more so than I want them to be a social justice, crusader, then how do they look at a school, ask questions of a school, evaluate that, the answers to get a pretty good handle that they're working on the same project?
Well, so I mean, there are some objective measures. I know that we've talked down about tests a little bit, but I do think that if you look at state report cards, school report cards, that the proficiency in reading and math is a good objective standard. Now, I know I've heard counter arguments against proficiency. It's really, the best way of looking at it, that maybe proficiency is too high or whatever. But objectively and relatively, if you look at one school's proficiency in reading and it's higher than the other schools, something real is being explained there by that number, right?
Okay.
Ignore things like graduation rates. Like, it's completely gameable. People pull strings all the time to make sure that kids pass classes and graduate. In fact, this is something that I mention every once in a while. Look at a school's proficiency rate and look at their graduation rate. If those two things don't match up in some reasonable way, then there's a lot of lying that's happening. If that's the case of a school that is in your area, that's not the school that you want to send your kids to, right? Now, I work at a private Catholic school. And it's a good one. Not all of them are, right? See if you can do a meet the parents night sort of deal even before you're enrolled, or will someone talk to you? Can you talk to the disciplined person? Do they have a disciplined person?
Right.
If they don't have a disciplined person, then they're not taking it seriously. If that's just a side job
Mm.
of the principal, then they're not taking it seriously enough. There should be someone who the majority of their position is dealing with that, and when you
That was the
speak to
vice
them.
principal in our schools always. It was the vice principal was the disciplinarian.
Yeah, yeah, and ours is too, but he's almost like entirely disciplined. Like he's like that's his main thing that he does, and he's hardcore about it. And when you
That's
talk to
that's what
him,
that's what I meant. Like literally the
yeah,
vice principal was in charge of discipline. So,
yeah. And when I went to high school, ours was an ex-Navy SEAL, so
oh
that
yeah.
was
I
perfect.
think ours was too, or he was ex-military of some kind of buzz cut. He was
Yeah, yeah,
scary. He was
yeah.
scary. Yeah, you didn't want to get in
So anyway,
trouble.
yeah, you talk to them, see, now, I've been catering this a little bit to parents who would want what I want out of school. So I guess I'll speak a little more generally about this then. Speak to the discipline person. If their ideas about what discipline is don't match up with yours, then you don't want to go to that school, right? You don't want your kid getting in trouble, and you don't want your kid getting away with things, right? You want them held to account when they do mess up, right?
Mhm.
Talk to the teachers. You know, are they forthcoming with information about their curriculum? You know, do they speak like they're talking about real things? If they're using terminology that is confusing to you, then they're probably doing something that is like the new style of teaching, right? Like if it doesn't match up with your ideas of what education are, then that's probably not the school that you want to go to, because you want to be involved in your kids' homework too. And if you can't understand what the teacher's saying, you're not going to understand the homework, right? I would say in general, if you're a parent of young kids, make sure that that school is using a phonics based reading program. If they're not, it's garbage. The other programs just do not stand up as well against structured phonics programs do. Um, if I'm pretty to one side on the debate. If they say balanced literacy, that's not good. You don't want balanced literacy. You want structured phonics program. That's my opinion. I think that the data backs that up.
Agreed,
Um,
100%.
yeah, yeah. So parents of young kids like that. If you get to tour the school and you're walking through the halls and every other sign has a rainbow flag on it, and that's not your thing, then don't bring your kids to that school, because
That's
that's a
right.
sign that they're very comfortable with knowing things and speaking about things in their own life about personal information that really doesn't belong in a school,
Right.
right? All of these things are signs. Is the school open to being visited?
Right.
Michaela in Britain, run by Catherine Burleson, right? She lets people come in. She's invited me there. I'm like, I live in Wisconsin, I can't go there, but she's invited me there, right? She invites people all the time. Parents can go. You can visit. You can
If
watch.
it weren't in Britain, like I would want to like go and beg her to like train me and teach her because she trains
Yeah,
with people. I mean, her people have to teach her way. There's like you got to throw out
exactly.
everything you knew.
Yeah,
But I'd be like, I'll do it. I'll do it. Like mold me. I'll be
yeah,
clay,
yeah.
because I
Right,
would love to work in an environment like that, but it's on the other side of the ocean.
right, right. I mean, I'll even be a student at that school.
I know, seriously, right?
I just want to be there. But yeah, so that aspect of being forthcoming, if that's not there, then what are they hiding, right?
That's right.
What is
Transparency is very key.
right? Yeah, I mean,
The
if
other
that's not
kind of
there,
trans is not so key.
yeah, I thought that was a little conspicuous pause in the middle of that word. Transparency. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very important.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so this is those things. There's no magic bullet to it, but I think if you are able to tour and you are looking around, if you get a good feeling about it, if you talk to people and they're making
Mhm.
sense, I can explain my curriculum to people in words that they understand, right? People understand real things like I teach grammar and reading books. And these are the books I teach. I teach the Scarlet Letter and the Crucible and Huck Finn, and like
Right.
it's very easy to speak to me and get an understanding of what your child's going to do. If that's
Mhm.
not the case, then maybe that's not the right place.
Yeah. And I would like to say, as a currently homeschooling parent, that if your child does not get the foundational skills, elementary, middle school, and they do go to high school, or even if you're homeschooling them at a later stage, this is what I'm facing now,
Yeah.
it is very difficult, even if your child is incredibly bright, as mine is,
Hmm.
to introduce, as I did this year, the Scarlet Letter as part of
Hmm.
our curriculum.
Yeah.
And it's I have to, like, I mean, I'm so angry. Like, I just
Yeah.
it's not her fault. But
Right.
we have to go at a snail's pace
Right.
because the vocabulary wasn't
Yes.
there. The stamina wasn't there. Again,
Right.
not the individual kid's fault. When there are that many teachers for that many years, she wasn't taught to read using science of reading in the first place. Then we move on to, we're not reading books that are in any way challenging. They're all whatever you want to pick. Go ahead and read it. We'll read the same book 17 times in
Right.
a row, and so on and so forth. So you can take an incredibly bright child, like really smart. I think people will get confused about that. They think that all kids who are bright, just high IQ, whatever, are just going to be fine. They're just going to, you don't need anything. You're just like, here, have a book and you'll read it magically.
Right.
No, you could have, like, you could be a very capable, very bright person. You still need to be taught certain things. It's
Oh,
a
for sure.
rare kid who's a prodigy. Like, I think people think smart equals prodigy. No, there's a whole range of very intelligent people who are not geniuses. They're
Right.
not profoundly gifted or whatever. But if they are not taught, it's waste, like massive waste.
Hmm.
And then what happens is, first of all, they know it. After a certain age, they know, like, they're aware, because they're smart. They're aware, like, I should know this, shouldn't I? Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. Why don't I know this? And then they can read. So they're reading things. But then when you give them more challenging reading, it's like going up a step that's too high and you have to lift your leg, there's something's wrong with the step, risers. That's what it's like. It's like, I've gone up all these little low steps where I can just run up the steps very easily. And then one is like about to trip you. You're like,
Right.
what happened? Well, that's what the Scarlet Letter is for
Yes.
somebody who was just kind of like, we're reading books. We're reading, literature that was
Right.
written 10 minutes ago.
Well, and I think this is part of the mentality that's behind the, like, wanting to destroy the idea of merit
Yep.
is, um, you know, well, they can't read the Scarlet Letter. Well, they don't need to. It's not any better than any other book. Who cares? Who cares if they can read Shakespeare? They might as well just read. They can read this. This retelling of Shakespeare that's told from the perspective of a 12-year-old black inner city kid. Or whatever. It's like that idea that everything is equal is really convenient for teachers of kids that cannot read Hawthorne and cannot read Shakespeare.
That's
It's
right.
it's a get out of jail free card for those teachers. They get to go, yeah, well, we don't read the Scarlet Letter, but who does anyway? It was written, 170 years ago, and it's not any better than, you know, the script for Easy A, or
Well,
whatever thing that they have.
and because we've allowed people to believe that because so much of school is arbitrary and so much of school makes learning drudgery and so on,
Mhm.
that you're supposed to like and have fun with
Yeah,
everything that you're learning, as if it, automatically, and you're supposed to know going in that it will be. When I think back to some of the difficult texts that I read, I wasn't enjoying it. I wasn't sitting
right.
there going, this is fun, a laugh riot reading Moby Dick or,
Right,
Billy Budd
right,
or any of this stuff.
yeah,
But it's afterwards, or when you're sitting in the class and you're having that conversation about the symbolism, or about the, the figurative language, or how the author is, conveying what they're trying to say. And that's when the fun begins. That's when you're like, oh, wait, now I see something I didn't see before. And so it expands your mind. You start being able to think about things in a much deeper way. You learn how to deal with abstractions and ambiguity and all
right,
kinds of things that you need to learn to deal with in life. You also learn lots of
right,
historical context. Can you really
right,
understand colonial America, for example, just from reading the
right.
facts about it? See, I think the beauty of
Right.
the Scarlet Letter is you're there. Like you're there. You're like in this bizarre mindset that is so dramatically different from our own
Yeah.
in how people treat each other and see each other and what they consider like dreadful dishonor versus, like what they're willing to carry around. And most of us will be like, why doesn't she just say something? And you're like, so
Right. Right. Yeah.
if you then go read the history of this country without that perspective or vice versa, then you don't really appreciate the miracle of this country. You don't really appreciate
Right.
the foundational principles of the Constitution. It all goes
Right.
together. And yet people look at it as, well, it's not fun, so why do we do it? Or no, it's old. People don't talk like that anymore. So who
Right.
cares? And like I, I can't relate to that, I guess. And I'm grateful, eternally grateful that I went to schools ultimately, for high school that forced me to read it. I wouldn't
Right.
have chosen to read that. There's no way,
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie to you and say 13-year-old Deb would have, grabbed Scarlet Letter to read. I'd be like, no.
Yeah.
But oh my
It's
God,
funny because
am I so glad they made me read that book.
I'm reading currently I'm reading the Dialogues of Plato, and that's a book it's not a laugh riot, it's
No.
not a page turner by any means exactly. And the most famous thing to come out of the dialogues probably is the allegory of the cave, right? And you're just talking about how you experience something and you might suffer through it, but then your eyes are open. And it's like the people coming out of the cave or whatever. And then I'm thinking about my master's program right now, and they assigned us the allegory of the cave and asked us how to relate that to curriculum in a school. And it's very obvious what they wanted us to say. They want us to say that we keep them in the dark and they should really be exposed to real idea or whatever. Anyway, so all of that. And then it just comes full circle in this conversation to me, because I'm thinking we would never have kids read Plato's dialogues in school because it's not fun. It's not something that you're motivated to do. We don't actually want them. See, I'm getting a little too close into that intention thing that I was warning myself against earlier. But we don't encourage them to step out of the cave. We don't encourage them to experience things that are uncomfortable for them, right? Being exposed to the truth is not comfortable all the time, right? It's not happy, right? Sometimes it's painful, right? And when we live in this culture in schools where we don't want to expose kids to any sort of pain or discomfort, we're not exposing them to truth at the same time. And that ultimately is just not sustainable as an educational system in America. And I hope that it ends soon.
Right.
It's replaced by something better.
Right. And that's a really good kind of final point to make, that we need to think more about helping our children discover what is true. It is discoverable. It is observable.
Really?
Does that mean we can know everything? No, but there are certain objective facts in this world, and we discover them using our five senses, and we discover them using empirical methodology. And
Mhm.
we used to know that in the West, and we used to prize that. That's how we built this incredibly prosperous, successful country that's, built on industry and all these things. And we're losing that, I think, because we've decided that somehow that's not pleasant and fun, and therefore we shouldn't do it anymore. Um, and I don't think it's really safe
Mhm.
to create a country full of people who think reality should be done away with because it's unpleasant.
Right. I
When what
mean,
we're supposed to be doing is teaching them how to deal with reality.
right. Yeah. And, um, we're seeing the backlash of that, especially in the past couple of days, of people who have just ran smack dab into reality and um, completely unable to deal with it, and not only unable to deal with it, but transmitting it out to their thousands of followers to watch them not dealing with it and to get in that same space with them. And that kind of social contagion is not going to lead anywhere good. And I do think that my profession, which used to be a very noble profession, does have something do with that becoming the status quo.
Do you think there'll be any self-reflection or awareness on the part of people in education looking around at what's happened in the last couple days?
Oof. I have just learned to not be that hopeful about uh, about teachers seeing the light. I really just think that the way that we fix education is by injecting as much competition as we can, and then letting people decide. And then I think some of these giant school districts are just going to go the way of Sears. They're no longer competitive, so you're out of business. Despite the fact that you're a century-old institution, we don't want to shop there anymore.
Yeah.
So that's my ray of hope for that. And otherwise, right now, you just got to find pockets of it wherever you go. So
Right. Right. Well, I'm very grateful to you for sharing all these thoughts with us and giving us those, tips on kind of generally speaking what to look for. I think that's pretty solid too, that, look for, transparency, discipline, teacher explains what they're going to teach and how they're going to do it. These seem pretty basic, right? But
right,
if you don't get these answers, folks, those are red flags. And even though we don't have what James is describing yet in terms of a total free market for education, there are choices currently. There are options. So just see what you've got in your area and just ask a lot of questions and don't just settle for the one that has the bus that comes to your block and feeds your kid
yeah,
lunch. Like that's really challenging. I, do you think that people who feel stuck in that situation, like let's say for the sake of discussion, somebody says, "Look, I live out on rural Route 4, in
yeah,
BFE, and there's really just the one school, and it's a regional school because they've got to get the kids from 3 townships together on a bus and bring us there. I don't have a choice." Or conversely, I live in a big inner city and the competition is so fierce for the magnets and the this and the that's that I'm stuck where I'm at because we didn't get it on the
right,
lottery and so on.
right, yeah.
What and I'm doing the Irish goodbye here with the, like, finishing, but now I got another question. What, if any, tips do you have for parents who feel like they're stuck in there, but they wanna make the best of it? They're like, "All right, I this is the situation I'm in. This is the way they're doing things." Do you recommend supplementation outside of school, like, tutors like me, people like me? Or is there something the parent can do or should do that won't put them so at odds that it, like, hurts their kid to either inoculate the child as they go in or to work with the school, do you think? I mean, it's okay to say no if you don't. I'm
Yeah.
just curious.
No, I think supplementation, yeah, is definitely the strongest asset you have there. Like I said, I taught my son to read because I don't want the schools to be left with it. I do feel a little risk that potentially he's going to be bored in school because the supplementation is going to put him ahead of a lot of other kids, if not all of them. I mean, the teachers already noticed that he's a reader, and she's pretty amazed by that. Um, but I'm going to continue doing things like that, in the summers. I'm going to still have curriculum. I bought The Well-Trained Mind by the Bowers.
Yeah.
It's the classical Bible, basically. It's focused on the trivium, and I'm going to get, some of that done. I'm a language arts guy, so I can assist them in that as much as possible. I'm not so much a math guy, but I do know, basic math, and I know enough to be able to follow, the resources that I've been pointed
Mhm.
at, and like I have a proclivity towards it. I'm not a fan. It doesn't excite me. But anyway, so yeah, that supplementation as much as possible, I think, is key. And my kids are likely going to be like me and my wife, just genetics, so we're lucky that they're probably going to be readers, not guaranteed, but pretty good chances. And the rest of it will supplement with people that are smarter than us in those areas, and do our best making it through. The main thing is, aside from the academics, is just the emotional stuff. But
Mhm.
I think parents, you are the transmitter of values to your kids. You have to stay on top of that, and you have to do it from an early age. And if you don't have that worked
Right.
out for yourself, you got to figure out what you believe in, and and seek that out in its strongest form, so that you're able to then transmit those values to your kids. You know, I have basic Christian values, though I'm not a Christian. My kids are going to go for now to a Lutheran school, where they're not doing, a lot of the nonsense that I really disagree with. But eventually they probably will switch to a private, one of the two schools that my wife or I work at. But we're just going to keep our culture, our values strong in them, and
Mhm.
hope that that's enough inoculation,
Mhm.
that in these social situations they won't be infected with the nonsense like other kids are.
Right.
But I sympathize for parents. I was going to homeschool, and then just a series of things kind of occurred that made that not really feasible for me. But I mean, I I do think that homeschooling is great and like probably the best model. And if you're
Mhm.
unable to do that, then the second best model is that cultural transmission and that supplementation that we just discussed. And after that, if you're not doing that, you're just kind of sending them into a landmine.
Yeah.
So, prepare them as best as you can.
Right, exactly. I think kids are quite resilient and they can deal with a lot if you are proactive, like you said.
Right.
And that is so important. That's such an important point to make sure that you take ownership of that cultural and values transmission, because otherwise your children are walking in empty and somebody's going to fill that.
Yep.
So it ought to be you.
100%.
All right. Well, thank you so, so much. It was great talking to you, and tell
Yeah.
people
That's
where
good.
they can find you if they want to follow your content.
Well, currently I'm just a lonely ex-user who gets in fights with random people on the internet. Just today
And
I
that is
found out I was a Nazi, so maybe you don't want.
oh, oh, you too? You too? Right. Well,
Yeah,
I'm a Jewish
yeah,
Nazi, so
it's a Nazi. Oh, that's
It's it's a new
yeah,
we're a
but
new
yeah,
breed.
I just tweet occasionally. It feels like I'm tweeting into the void, but yeah,
Yeah.
I've written before for a conservative education publication that was run by Danny Buck and Tony Kinnett. Um, that kind of fell apart. But I've written under my pseudonym in National Review and City Journal, so I might go back to writing at some point. Um, Podcasting is fun. We'll see. We'll see. I always
Yeah.
keep myself too busy. So
Well, that's why, in case anyone's wondering, that's why James is here, incognito a little bit, because it's difficult. I have trouble getting teachers to come talk to me at all because I
yeah,
mean, I understand. I get it. But that's why. And so I'm grateful that you decided to do it. And I've learned a lot. It's really helpful to talk to people who are actually on the ground. I haven't been in the classroom for a long time. I tutor, but I'm getting it like secondhand. My teacher told us today was a classic example. Today we learned, I said, what are you doing in English class these days? Well, today we learned about what was it? Thesis statements.
hmm
Sixth grade. I said, "Oh, they're really interesting. That's great. What did you learn about them?" "Well, they're kind of a character study." I went, "I'm sorry, what?" And so I'm like, "Can you explain?" And
yeah.
then so she started talking about that they were told to read what they were reading to identify how the characters were feeling
Okay.
in the book, and which is, I mean, a part of a character study, but it's not really like the whole thing. And then and she said, "Yeah, and then we're supposed to write about it, and that's kind of the thesis statement." And I went, "Okay." So still very confused to like what
Mhm.
she had been taught. So then I went and I looked up, and I sort of read to her like the definition of a thesis statement. I said, "Did it sound like this?" Because I'm like checking to see whether she's
Right.
misrepresenting what and she's like, "No, that's not what we were told." And I was like, "So thesis statement now has a new definition. Did you know?" So
Yeah.
I discover this every day that
Yeah.
there are teachers out there tossing terms around in English class, or we're talking about how to do a character study, or talking about how to build, how to write an essay. And I'm like, "Mm-mm, mm-mm, mm-mm,
Yeah.
that's not what that is." But I'm in this weird position where I don't want to directly contradict the teacher,
Oh,
because
of
I don't
course.
want my poor student going into school and it ends up in a battle. So instead, I bring up some objective piece of evidence and say, "Well, okay, well, just remember that a thesis statement does this, and this is
Yeah.
what you need to do, and a character study does this." And I just give them the other version,
Right.
I don't say your teacher's wrong. I just like, here's this. And now, go do what you're going to do. Like, she can take it up with the teacher, but it won't be my tutor says.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
And
I see it.
I feel bad for my kids' future teachers because I'm not a very agreeable person. So.
Well, but you know what? I get, within reason. Obviously, I don't advise parents to
Yeah.
go to war with the teacher. But as long as you can, what worked for me in the end was just going, "Mhm, okay," and then I'd leave the classroom or I'd leave at the school, and I'd look at my kid and go, you know? And we developed like a little code language, and it's like, why are they telling me? It's like, I really don't know, but we're gonna do it this way. This is how we do it. This is the right way to do it. Are you sure, Mom? I'm like, yeah. Now we have an edge, you and I, because our kids know that we were, they know you're a teacher, and
Well,
I
yeah,
was a teacher. So it's like you got the white, you get the white lab coat, a seal of
right,
approval. I have the diploma. That I feel bad for the
right,
parents who want to say it's wrong, and it's like, but you're a doctor, or
right,
you're a businessman, or you're a nurse, or you're a secretary. What do you know? It's like, I think I
yeah.
know. So anyway,
Okay, yeah,
but thank you. And
yeah. Thank you.
everybody just follow me. It's at James A. Furey, Furey on X. And it's good content. It really is. I hope you start writing again. Because I follow you and I'm just like, okay, I got to talk to this guy. So
Awesome, awesome. Well, it's good to
anyway,
meet you, and this is a good talk. Thank you.
all right. Thank you so much. And we'll see you guys next time. Take care.
Bye.